Okay, we'll start recording. All right, Germanic culture. Now, the interesting impact on neighbors here, is that because Germany would be considered a collectivistic culture, and therefore the neighbors become very important? Would you classify Germany as a collectivistic culture? No, not really. Western Europe, by and large, like North America, is very individualistic. So why would they be concerned about neighbors? Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The word respect. They have a lot of respect for their neighbors and their privacy. So that it's actually more of an individualistic reason. You know, I don't have a right to infringe on the privacy of my neighbors. Very different than a Latin American scenario, where if you're going to play your loud music, you want the whole neighborhood to join in and enjoy your music. You're providing music for everybody. And you may not understand if your neighbors get upset with you, because after all, we're one big happy family. It's a very different concept. Yeah. All right. So, okay, wait, hold on. Yep, okay. So there are quiet hours in this cultural cluster. And I don't know. Has anybody here ever lived in a neighborhood where there were norms? Like I know that some neighborhoods have associations where the association takes care of your yard and stuff, and they cut the grass. But has anybody lived in a neighborhood where there were rules about things like noise, in order to ensure the respect of neighbors? Okay, no, I never have. It's something that's totally foreign to my way of thinking. Lana, in Japan, are there rules like that, or is it just understood that people just are very respectful of other people's privacy? Okay, so there aren't laws doing that. It's just something that people naturally will respect others' privacy. All right, good. So now understand that I'm not saying here, nobody's saying that this is universal in this cluster, and everywhere you go in Germany or Switzerland or Austria or whatever, you're going to find this. But this is something that does typically happen in the cluster. All right, everyone should be quiet from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. daily, and on Sundays and holidays, some even daily from 1 to 3 p.m. During those hours, you may not, yeah, Emma? No, go ahead. Interesting. And I'm guessing that what she's saying by that, when she was surprised he was mowing, is not because he was a Christian, but just because it's a cultural thing. Most Lutherans are either, Lutheran or Catholic, at least nominally. And so that would be a pervading idea. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, there's a good illustration of that. So, yeah, okay, there. Look at number one. Give me, what else do you think might go on this list? They're all related to quiet, but what might you not put on this list? Or what else might be on this list? Vacuum. Okay, similar to that. They talk about running the wash machine. Now that's coming later down the list, but it'd be the same idea. Appliances that make noise. Well, I'll come to that in just a minute. What's another thing you might think of? Yeah. Then that's coming down the list too, but loud music, yeah. And the other ones you might not get. drop glass bottles in a recycling bin. Do you ever go out, and we have recycling bins here, and so every so often my wife will ask me to take the recycles out and dump them in. Of course, they're usually glass and cans, and they're out in the garage. I dump them in there, and it makes a huge noise, okay? In fact, if you hear the recycle guys come and pick up the recycling stuff, and ours come in the afternoon. The garbage guys come in the morning. They're like 6 o'clock in the morning, but the recycle guys don't come to the afternoon. I wonder if part of that might be because it's such a noisy, I don't know, I've never thought of that. Rev your car engine. Sundays. Some of you have cars like that are just naturally noisy. You need to replace the, my son, when he was about 17, David, went out and bought, one of those muffler connect things tailpipe things that actually makes it louder. He was in that stage of life, You don't blast loud music. Nina, you mentioned that one, I think, or somebody did, loud music. Yeah. Now, in our culture, I don't know, I think that's kind of understood even in our culture. There's a certain respect. In the summertime, everybody, here's the thing. Depending on the neighborhood, for instance, I live in a neighborhood where everybody has central air, and some of you do too. So, if you're inside the house, even if somebody's blaring their music outside, you're probably not gonna be an issue. But I don't know. Run the wash machine. So, Lana, you mentioned the vacuum, but the same idea. Don't run loud appliances. Now you say, well, what if it's inside your house? Our wash machine is very quiet except for when it's done, it sings. You guys have one of those kind that sings to you when it's done? Yeah, I could give you the melody, but so I think they may be talking about neighborhoods where in some European neighborhoods, houses are very close together, and sometimes the wash machine is even outside, like in a porch area, and not inside the house. I think that's more the idea. It's not that you can't. That means you can't run your blender inside your house. No, that's not the idea. I think that's what they're talking about. All right. So what are we talking about? What is this cluster? Well, here it is. Obviously, Germany is the main country. That's why it's called Germanic cluster, because the greatest influence comes from Germany. But you have Austria, Switzerland, and the Netherlands up here as well. And they are all considered part of this cluster, right? But don't make the mistake of thinking that they all consider themselves alike, all right? Hi, Hannah. So, and we'll see that. In fact, that's the next point that I want to make. And I'll leave that that's actually in your notes so you can see this. The next point I want to make is Austrians dislike being called Germans. We had a student here several years ago from Austria. And his name was Emmanuel Seawald. I don't know if any of you know him, really nice guy. And his nickname on campus was Austria. He was a pretty good soccer player, and they just called him Austria. I don't know if he liked it. I always called him Emmanuel because I didn't know if he liked that or not. But one thing that I know that Austrians and Germans, conversely, don't like is being called one or the other. Yeah. And I think you're all aware of the fact that even Adolf Hitler was not German, right? He was Austrian. That's an interesting sidelight. Number 4, the Germanic cluster is small geographically, but big economically. It's strong in foreign trade. Excuse me, that should be a comma. Give me 1 second and I'll correct my error there. Make that a comma. There we go. Sorry, I'm doing my my housekeeping chores here in front of you, but I just can't stand it. All right. All right. Though having relatively few natural resources, it's the world's 3rd largest exporter. So that's a huge area. a little bit of a historical sketch. Now, I'm not an expert on German history by any stretch of the imagination, but some of the stuff you'll probably recognize. Tacitus is considered to be one of the greatest Roman historians of all time. And a lot of his stuff is available. And he describes people in that area, which would be the modern day cluster, as lovers of fighting and freedom. Doesn't that sound familiar? Now, we Americans might say we love freedom. We would maybe be hesitant to say we love fighting, right? We take pride in saying we fight out of necessity for the sake of freedom. But probably we would be hesitant to say we love fighting and freedom, right? A little different angle. The culture, as we know it, began with Charles the Great, Charlemagne. You guys studied this guy? What's associated with Charlemagne? What's he known for? What kingdom did he kind of establish? Well, it wasn't the Roman Empire, but it was the Holy Roman Empire. Yeah, he's associated with the Holy Roman Empire, okay? And in fact, I saw just the other day a photo, and I don't remember if it's in Germany. I don't remember the country, but it's a painting, actually, a mosaic, I think, of St. Peter, and at St. Peter's feet are two individuals sitting at his feet. One of them is Charles the Great, and the other one is Pope Leo. So it's the idea of the religion and politics coming together under the authority of St. Peter. So he was one of the early guys that really brought together politics and religion in the empire. All right, anyway, then there's the Habsburg dynasty, lots of German dynasties. The Habsburg lasted for 7 or 8 centuries, very long enduring dynasty. And under that, they enlarged their territories through strategic marriages. That's interesting. You see that in the Bible. I mean, how many times were alliances made? Probably most of Solomon's 700 wives were results of political alliances that he made with all sorts of people. And so the Habsburg dynasty was able to expand their territories through political marriages. They eventually became the Holy Roman Empire. But Charles the Great is the guy that is kind of associated with the beginnings of that. I guess maybe it's not accurate to say that he started it because he was the 8th century, and the name Holy Roman Empire didn't come till later. But he's at the foundation of that, part of the foundation of that. So anyway, it's just a little bit of history for what it's worth. During the era of the Nazis, Hitler's agenda was to continue one united German empire that would last 1,000 years. And of course, he called his movement what? What was the name of his political movement? Third Reich. And what does that mean? What does Third Reich literally mean translated? Third, I'll translate third, but what is Reich? Yeah, Third Reign. So you have 2 other reigns preceding that. What are they? If this is the third reign, what are the first 2? Yeah, well, you have the Roman Empire, then you have the Holy Roman Empire, right, which came about as a result of the influence of Charlemagne and others, right? So his would be the Third Reich. And of course, his dream was that this would last for 1,000 years. Okay. All right. By the way, I think you're all aware of this, but I'll say it anyway. We who are not German citizens really need to be careful that the way we talk about Hitler and the Nazis, because Americans, especially right after the war, but even trickling down through the last several decades, we're good at making fun of them. Okay, And it's one thing for a German citizen to make fun of Hitler and those guys. It's quite another thing for a foreigner to do that. That makes sense? Now, I mean, some of you have watched Hogan's Heroes, and you're probably aware that the whole cast of Hogan's Heroes, except for the American guy, are all Jews. All right? Have you guys watched Hogan's Heroes? Yeah, they're all Jewish actors. And they're all, you know, this is a satire on Nazi Germany. And Hogan is the only one who's an American. And I remember, you know, my doctrine teacher at Faith here was Dr. Manfred Kober from East Germany. He fled East Germany when he was 12 years old during the communist era and came to Pennsylvania and grew up there. And he used to tell us in class his favorite TV show was Hogan's Heroes, and he was German himself. It's okay for him to say that. But for you as a, and that's not just true with relation to Germany, but anytime you're dealing with ethnically sensitive humor, if I can use the word that way, people within the ethnicity can get away with it, but those who try to do it from outside can get themselves burned. Okay, it can be offensive. So just keep that in mind. All right. Today, Germany is the European Union's most populous nation. And there's no reason to think that's going to change anytime soon. How many of you have German background? I may have asked this before, okay. All right, several. I'm not even sure, you know, Lounsborough, I've had people, I think I've told you before that in Brazil, a lot of people on the street who didn't even know me would just yell out and call me Alemão, German. I don't know if there's German in my blood that I'm not aware of. I thought I was English. I don't know. Maybe I'll find out that I'm not. Anybody here ever do one of those DNA tests where you know, the saliva test you send in and I don't know how accurate those are. I have heard that they tend to be fairly accurate. I've been tempted to try one of those someday just to see. Okay, just some interesting statistics before we move on here. Notice that in Europe, there at the top is Germany with 83,000. In other words, the population is considerably higher even than second place, France. And that's fairly recent, 2019. So there you can see. Smallest one, Malta, about 500,000. Okay. Did I say 83,000, 83 million? All right. So some characteristics of the Germanic people. First, they are known for their resistance to quick change. Why do you suppose that would be? Yeah, it seems like the longer you've been established as a people, the less slower you are to want to make change. I think that's part of it. There may be at least another factor involved, why they would be hesitant to make quick change. It has to do with something we said near the beginning of the class about Germany. Maybe a little bit of that. It's actually something you said, Abby, when I asked you why I use that image of the gears. What was the answer? They like precision. Yeah, they're very careful. And usually somebody who's very, very fussy about precision is going to be very careful about the way he or she crafts something. And quick changes normally do not aid in precision, right? Normally quick changes are more haphazard, they're more risky, and they don't reflect precision. So if you're a precision-oriented person, you're very careful and methodical about how you do things, okay? So who are the people like that here in the room? You're very careful, you don't like, okay, good. I've told you this several times. Every time you answer one of my questions, it confirms in my mind that I wouldn't mind flying with you. I think you can do a good job. You're answering the way a pilot should answer. Yeah. So, no, I'm not. I'm more of a spontaneous guy. You don't want to fly with me. Well, for one thing, I don't even know how to fly. But even if I did, you probably wouldn't want to. All right. So, so if you're ministering in a Germanic country, all right, you might find that people in your church that truly know the Lord are a little hesitant to make some of the quick changes that you think are important to make in order to keep the church going. You want to be cutting edge, you see an opportunity, you want to take it, and you might find that you meet up with some resistance. It's not necessarily because the people aren't spiritual or they're not on board or they don't want to grow. It's because they want to do it right. And so if you're the kind that you want to seize the opportunity, you might find that you meet up with resistance. Letter B, they are pragmatic and utilitarian. Now, I don't want to overstate this, but okay, you guys have studied liberalism in theology, right? How liberalism came to our country. Do you remember any of the historical backdrop of that? How did liberalism make its way to the United States in our churches, in our major denominations? That was part of it. But where did they pick that up? Where did they go to get those ideas? Pardon? What? Yeah, Europe and Germany probably was taking the lead in that. Remember, we didn't have seminaries for a while. We had Bible institutes, but people in Europe were already getting, advanced degrees in theology. So our guys would leave here and travel to Germany or someplace like that to get their master's degree in theology. And they were tainted with a lot of liberalism. They brought it back, okay? Part of the reason for that may be right here. Because if you think about it, a big part of theological liberalism is keyed to what works, what's pragmatic. So the social gospel, which is very much a help people, we can see and measure results, okay, reflects a pragmatic and utilitarian approach to truth, as opposed to a theological foundation, which has to stay in place even if you don't see the results that you want. See, that's the real test. The test of your theology and your devotion to your theology is, do I cling to it even when things aren't turning out the way that I think they should be? See? And so I think that the pragmatic and utilitarian mindset of the Germanic culture facilitated a move away from a theological foundation to a more social gospel idea. And we ended up bringing a lot of that back here. Now, I'm not saying that being practical is wrong. By the way, do you understand the difference between being practical and being pragmatic? Being practical is something that you do. Being pragmatic is more something you are. There's a slight difference, but I think it's worth noting. Pragmatism is a way of thinking. It's an approach to life. It's an approach that says, I use it if it works. Whereas being practical says, I want it to work, but that's not what runs it. That's not what determines it. So there's a difference there. C, they are known for their inventions, such as the printing press. I have no idea what these gears are from, by the way. I just found it on a stock photo. So what's the famous printing press? It came from Germany? Gutenberg, yeah. There are all sorts of models of that. You've probably seen pictures of them. It's really fascinating. Yeah. Any of you been to Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan? You ever get a chance to go there? They have, not the Gutenberg model, but they do have model. We were in Washington, D.C. several years ago, and there was a reproduction of the Gutenberg press there as well. Fascinating. They value art, literature, and music, which are standard requirements in their school curriculum. Okay, what's the big problem in our public schools here? Why not sports? Probably the best answer you can give right there. Yeah. So, and look, depending on where you see, who are the teachers here? Yeah. Okay. I mean, if you end up teaching in a Christian school, you might have to fight that quite as much. But if you end up in a public school, you might. We have just surrendered the arts. Why? Well, mm-hmm. All right. Yeah. For whatever reason, it seems like we tend in our country to view the arts more as a luxury and not as fundamental. Hmm. So why don't we charge for people to come to concerts? They won't come. Isn't that sad? I think you're right. Because we can't say it's the cost of doing it because the cost of sports is incredible. It's very expensive to have sports programs. Yeah. So I think we've come to view it as a luxury, an unnecessary addition if we can afford it. But the Germanic culture views it as fundamental. You've got to have it if you're going to really be prepared for life. And I think we've lost some of that. So maybe some of you can help to bring that back. All right, art, literature, music. Yeah, let me see what I want to do with this. Okay, give me some names. Artists. I'm thinking painters primarily here. German people. What's probably the most famous German? Well, some of them artists. Have you guys studied this at all? Literature? Music? Okay. Bach. And Bach was, I understand, he was pretty much by the book, right? You did it, yeah. Bach? Okay. Yeah. 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 Now Handel, he lived in England, right? But was he German by? Yeah. He grew up in England. Remember that? Okay. But he worked for the king there. I mean, yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I talk about philosophy here, maybe later. Well, in case I don't, what are some famous German names associated with philosophy? Well, Kanzelman, okay, Reinhold Niebuhr. I mean, Karl Barth. Now he was Swiss, I think, but still he'd be part of the same, either Swiss or Dutch, but he would be from that same cluster. A lot of names come out philosophically, okay? Freud, a lot of those guys. Yeah. So there's a lot of German influence. I kind of switched gears here to philosophy, but still. And again, their art, their literature, their music, very precisionist in at least, at one time. Obviously, we'll talk about some changes in music here in just a minute. Yeah, there's a replica of the Gutenberg printing press. I do not know where that's located, if that's the one in DC or someplace else, but pretty interesting. So why Germany is so famous in the arts? Okay, well, many lived in dense cities which could invite performers. Can you even imagine what it'd be like not to have electronic access to music? I grew up without it. I mean, the only things we had were records. And then they came out with some forms of other media. But I mean, I go home now and I say, Alexa, play such and such on Spotify. Bam, and there it is. I cannot imagine even what it would be like not to have that. What did you do? If you wanted music, you either had to learn to play it or teach it in your family, or you had to live in a place that was densely enough populated that could afford inviting and paying performers to come and do it for you. That's really weird. Some of you have been to the Des Moines Symphony? Yeah, I take my wife there every so often. I love it. We went there, I think I told you once, we went there when they had, not Yitzhak Perlman, not Isaac Stearns, but the other violinist, from the Jewish violinist. I'll think of his name later. Anyway, but that was the only way you could hear it. And so if you didn't live in a dense city, you really didn't have much opportunity. And they hired musicians for church or family occasions, okay? So, and of course, these were typically in larger churches, which would also be found in cities, because obviously the rural areas had smaller churches that couldn't always afford to have somebody come play. It wasn't out of the question to hire somebody to be the musician. In fact, when I was in seminary out in Tacoma, Washington, the lady that led our choir was a paid organist for the Lutheran Church. They still do that now? Okay. Not in our movement. No, Why not? I don't know. My son is a paid, music pastor out in Michigan, but he also is responsible for building and grounds, right? And right now they're doing a remodeling project that's taking a lot of his time. I said, hey, God's teaching you something through all this. But if you had a large family and you had enough income, you could invite somebody to come and perform. But apart from that, you really didn't have much contact with music. Okay. They were a widely decentralized country, so music became the responsibility of local governments. In other words, there wasn't a lot of packed in population. And so local governments were the only ones in most places that could afford to bring somebody in. But they valued music and they did it. And just backing up to this idea of the church here, I'm not a music historian, so you can correct me, you guys who've studied this more. But it's my understanding that one of the reasons that so much of the music was written for the church is because that was one of the few venues that you could write for. Is that correct? So a lot of the music, classical and otherwise, was written for. Yeah, wow. Wagner's another one I was thinking of. Wagner was German, right? He wasn't the nicest guy I understood. He was kind of I'd like to study him. Every so often I have a conversation with my son because he had to study all that and he enjoys it. So these are the types of things that helped Germany to become what it became in terms of its contribution to the music world. And think of the impact it still has. Yeah, Emma? That's a good question. Not sure. Perhaps. Most of the world views us as spoiled American brats. We're the little country, we're the teenage country, 240 some years old, right? That thinks we're tough stuff. I mean, that's the way we're viewed from the outside. And, just like most spoiled teenage brats, we're eventually going to commit, we're going to get ourselves in trouble, which we seem to be doing. So, so they're well established. They have such a long history of, and I would love to study more. I mean, Bach he understood the science of music, right? I mean, even counting the sound waves and stuff from different tones. I'm getting him way over my head here, but is that right? Didn't he do study in that area? And that's how they came up. Is that how they came up with the octave idea that we have today? Was it based on sound waves? I know that he messed with that at least, and it's fascinating. Then you go to India where you have quarter tones instead of half tones, and just it's fascinating. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure how to fully answer that. Speaking of the man, there he is. My son had a book called Deep Deep Bubbling Brook or something like that is about the life of Bach. Does that ring a bell? Deep Flowing Brook, I think it was called. It's about the life of Bach. And quite a family man, if I understand. German schools attracted people from all over the world. Precision, I would love to see some old scores. In your class, you guys get to look at some of those, some ancient, really old scores, like from back in the 1700s and things. Yeah. Are they quite different from the scores today? Did they have the treble and bass clefs back then, or was it all? Okay. I wonder if did the Germans play a role? I'm sorry if I'm asking you questions that I don't know what you've studied. If the Germans played a role in even developing the score, the way that the system, the way we understand it today. Yeah. Okay. I've seen some old scores that just a whole bunch of lines with no division. Was that pre? Okay. Okay. Fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Number 3, German music was bold, energetic, and perfectionistic. This contrasted the fluid half-tonal music of India. It's sometimes when you listen, and if you listen, you can go online and find all kinds of examples. When you listen to Indian music, sometimes it almost sounds like just a flow of notes. Rather than hitting individual notes, it almost sounds like a connected flow. And that's because those half-tonal notes are hard for our ear to distinguish. And so sometimes to us, it sounds like they're singing off key when really they're not. Yeah. What era was it that began to be a little bit less exact? I mean, Bach was very much disciplinarian in that area, but was it the Romantic area where they started relaxing a lot more? Yeah. Okay. Started breaking some of the rules, and I may have told you that I talked to the former music professor at Maranatha. He's been retired for several years now. His name was Budal, his last name. And he made the statement when he came down for a music seminar when I was still in Brazil. He said nowadays, in contrast with Bach and those guys, there are very few rules in composition, and even those are commonly broken. So pretty much the sky is the limit now, whatever you want to do. Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. The Reformation produced German hymns. They were intended more for home than church use, but did become part of the German hymnal. And did Bach write a lot of hymns too? It seems like he, I don't know. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, again, I apologize if I'm putting you on the spot there. I just am not sure. The only one I remember is he wrote For Elise. He wrote that for a gal, but that wasn't we don't have any hymns in our hymn book that are actually, I don't know. I'm in over my head. Here, look, this one's cool. Swing music was banned in the early 1940s because it was thought to make the youth rebellious. Isn't that interesting? Now, early 1940s, what's going on in Germany? War. This is Hitler's war. Hitler understood, he was a bad guy, but he was smart. And he understood the importance of capturing the youth and their minds, right? And so swing music was outlawed because he wanted to make sure that he didn't create rebellion among the youth and that music had something to do with that. That's interesting. In the 1960s, now I'm getting to my youth, I was actually born in 60, krautrock became the German counterpart to American rock. If you had tried to do something like krautrock in the 1940s, you'd probably end up in jail. I have not listened to krautrock. It'd be interesting to find an example of it online. And by the way, there's another, krautrock is a legitimate term. It's actually, but you never call a German a kraut. Okay, that was very common. Americans referred to them as the Krauts during the war. Okay, but you don't do that. Krautrock is okay because it is a legitimate genre of German music. I don't know if they even still do it now, if it exists, but it did in the 60s. And part of that was because of the influence of America, starting to spread its fingers around the world. And people wanted something like the 60s rock that was coming out, and so the Germans made their own version of it, and they called it Krautrock. Maybe we'll learn a song later about that. Germany is the 4th largest producer of rap and hip hop today. Woo! Slight change from the days of Bach. What would Bach do if he could come back to life and listen to some of that today? I don't know what he would do. Probably jump back in his grave as fast as he could. I don't know. Yeah, a lot of interesting discussions on what's legitimate music and what's not, isn't there? But that's not the class we're in, so I won't burn myself by opening that can of worms. But now here's the comparison. We're talking about Germany and India in this case, and it is quite fascinating. Actually, okay, just before I get to this, you guys familiar with the sitar instrument in India? It looks like a giant version, kind of like of a combination of a guitar and a banjo. It's kind of. You ever heard one played? Some of them have lots and lots of strings. I think we've played one actually in non-Christian religions. It's really quite a beautiful instrument. It sounds almost kind of like a harp or a harpsichord combination. It's really interesting. But great big instrument. A lot of times they sit down to play them. Okay, it's typical to sit down and play that instrument. And that one's got, if you've never heard one before, it's sitar. Just check it out on Popular or someplace on YouTube and listen to some. All right. Germany is famous for its contributions to modern psychology and philosophy. And we've already mentioned some names of guys involved in that. And again, they were precise. They were good analysts. If you're a person who's precise, you like things to be done precisely, you're probably also analytical. The two kind of go together, right? You like to analyze things and put things in the right order. That's one of the reasons I think also why psychology and philosophy coming out of Germany was very popular. People could explain it. It was didactic. They could, it made rational sense. It didn't have much of a theological foundation, but rationally, they were able to explain it and make sense of it, okay? And so it became very popular. Yeah. Germans expect visitors to know something of their rich heritage. If you go to live in the Germanic cluster and you know nothing about their history, you're probably going to have a hard time gaining respect among the people there. They might wonder even why you're there. If you don't care about our heritage, then why do you even bother to come to our country? See, it's kind of like Canadians get upset because we expect them to know all 50 states, but how many of the provinces in Canada can we state? We got enough Canadians on campus now, I think, and a president that served in Canada. That's we're kind of woke now to the Canadian reality. Excuse me. I did that to wake you up. All right. Well, let's look at some cultural dimensions in Germany. That's probably taken, at the World Cup that Germany beat Brazil 7-1 or 7-2. 7-1, I think. The biggest single embarrassment in Brazilian sports history. Now, the customer's not always right. Now, I'm not going to play this video clip. I'll just tell you. David Livermore walks into a motel or hotel in Germany, and he gets his room, and then the lady gives him his keys, and she says, "Now, what time would you like your room cleaned?" And he said, "I don't care, most any time, but I can just step out a few minutes with a clean lady." No. What time do you want your room? Well, I'll be out usually I'm out in the afternoon, so sometime in the afternoon. What time do you want your room cleaned? So he says, well, all right, 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Okay. Well, at 2 o'clock, he's napping in his room, or he's doing something in his room, and so the lady doesn't come in. So next morning he comes out for breakfast. He stops up to the counter and he says, just want to let you know that my room didn't get clean yesterday. And the lady said, that's because you were in your room. Now, in our country, if that happens, what do? They come back, they knock or something, they come back around. But now, I'm not saying that every German hotel will do this, okay? So again, stereotyping is always a hazard. But so she asked, what time would you like your room cleaned today? Same question. So he gave an answer and made sure that he wasn't in there when the time came. And the point that he makes here is that, you would think that if that happened in our country, people say, I'll go to some other hotel, phooey on you guys. You're not here to serve the customer, you're here to serve yourselves, right? That's kind of our reaction. Their reaction is, if you don't like our hotel, there are other hotels where you could stay. We believe we do it right, and this is the way we want to do it because we want to do a good job. And if you're not on board with that, find some place else to go and stay. Very different mentality than what you get here. Which means if you try to take a church plant to Germany and you want to use a marketing approach, the seeker-sensitive idea, you might find that it's not that big of a deal. It's not as popular there because they're not as concerned about making sure that the visitor is happy and, welcome and feels good and all that. Very different. Which isn't all bad, by the way, not all bad. The idea that the customer is always right isn't always right. Individualist, but less than the Anglos. Not so much like the Anglos. The Anglos definitely take the cake on that. But they are an individualistic nation, as most of Western Europe is. Low power distance, little pomp and circumstance. Now, there are some exceptions. For instance, you watch some of the marches, like during World War II, you see these old videos of the soldiers marching and stuff, a lot of pomp. But that's an exceptional thing that was done during the war era to get the people on board, to excite the people. But generally speaking, they're not impressed with a lot of pomp. Now, does that remind you of another cluster we studied? What's the other word that we used that kind of communicates the same idea of pomp and circumstance? Especially in the way you dress. Flashy or bling. Yeah, remember that? Which cluster was that? Yeah, the Nordic cultural cluster, the IKEA people. We looked at the cars, yeah. Okay. A very high uncertainty avoidance. And that makes sense. You're going to be low risk if you're high precision, right? Part of being a precision kind of a person is I want to avoid every possible fallacy. And so it makes you a very low risk person. Competitive. Oh, yes. Just ask the Brazilian soccer team. By the way, when I watch Brazil play Germany, and I'm not a soccer expert by any stretch. Abby, who else plays soccer in here? Sharon, yeah, you two could. But when I watch Germany and Brazil play, I see two very different styles. Germany is very fundamental. It's like the old coach John Wooden from UCLA. He taught his players how to put their socks on and how to tie their shoes so that they wouldn't get, not because they didn't know how to tie shoes, but because he didn't want them to get blisters. He taught them every possible, precise, fundamental aspect of the game. And if you showboated, you sat down on the bench. Everything had to be by the book. And they won 88 straight games doing that. Nowadays, that won't work. Okay, because they learned how to showboat with excellence. Who was one of the first showboaters in basketball? I'm getting a little off track here. Remember the guy who played for Atlanta Hawks? There's a movie about him. He was a Christian. Can't remember his name now. Anyway, so Brazilian soccer is very flashy, a lot of show. German soccer, very methodical. Yeah, bang, bang, bang. Just it's very, very different. And they're good at it. Pete Maravich, Pistol Pete. You guys have heard of him, haven't you? Yeah. He was one of the first ones to start showboating, behind the back passes, between the legs, things like that. And people looked down on that back then, but not anymore. In fact, you're going to pay to go to a game now. You want that. Punctuality. Remember the famous German clocks? Yes. Punctuality. All right. Low context. Look, just give it to me straight. That's part of precision. I want to hear it the way it is. I want to get it right. Don't leave me wondering. They're more of a doing culture than being, and again, it's stereotypical, but in general, they lean toward the doing side. They want you to accomplish, get things done. They're more universalist, which is reflected in that hotel illustration, right? Tell me what you were. I'm an American. I expect, I don't care who you are. When do you want your room cleaned? More neutral. In fact, the Germanic cluster is considered the most neutral cluster in the whole world. Okay? Very, very slow to express themselves until they know they can trust you. Tight. Multiculturalism is more difficult to find there. Now, it's there. Globalism has its fingers all around the world. So you can't go hardly anywhere in the world now unless you go back in the deep jungles, someplace where, nobody's ever been. So we'll end with some do's and don'ts. By the way, I love that picture. Yeah, I found that, woohoo. I wonder how many days of the year do you get a view like that mountain? You see pictures like that, say, man, it'd be great to live there. Then you discover that there are 5 days out of the year when you can see that mountain, and the rest of the time it's covered with clouds. Do's and don'ts. Some of you have been on a Corral tour to Europe? Yeah, okay. And this year they're not going, right? Yeah. So. They do dive into good discussion. Germanic people like good debate. Now, they don't like sloppy debate. But if you get involved in a good debate where there are good rational arguments and things, they like that. They're not afraid of that. Okay? They just don't want it to be sloppy and emotional. They want it to be objective, rational. Mm-hmm. So if you're getting a Bible study, for example, and you're in a Germanic cluster, make sure you stick to the text and the arguments come out of the text. Be careful about speculating. Red flags will go up everywhere if you start making speculations about Bible texts and things like that. Don't disparage academics. Important. And when you talk about academics, don't talk about the arts, like music and and dance and all that stuff, as co-curricular. See, no, it's part of the academic foundation. Do be conscious of your volume. I have trouble with this. If I'm in a country that's a little bit more neutral, I always embarrass myself. I became a little bit more Brazilian after 19 years in Brazil, and it changed me forever. That's okay. I is who I is. Oops, that's a new culture cluster. All right, questions or comments? It's only 5 after, but I'm not going to drag this out, and make you guys suffer. Any questions or comments about this cluster? I hope that you ask yourself as we go through these. I mean, it's not necessarily a determinative question, but it's an interesting question to ask. Would I fit here? Would I be able to function in this cluster? So as we go through these, ask yourself. Obviously, the cluster that you're a part of, yeah. But what about the other ones? How would I do living in a place like this? Well, if there are no questions, we're done. See you on Thursday.